Hi everybody, welcome to the Tuesday Tips. I've got to apologize, we're a day late with loading our Tuesday Tips, but I've been busy. I had a customer of mine from Cape Town that's been here for a one-on-one fitting session with me. So we had to get her sloper actually fitted perfectly for her so that she can start designing, and I must say she's been very happy with her fitting. Now going back to our tips that I'm going to share with you today. Last week I took you through the process of how I designed this top, just the dot manipulation, what I did to my pattern. And I mentioned last week, and I just want to go back to that, I mentioned that, you know what, I find we can work it with a Ponte Roma or a slightly firmer knit, but we are going into summer and it is hot on this side. So I went into my stash and I found a nice cool, it's like a cotton knit, but it's quite a lightweight. It's really a lightweight cotton knit. And I decided, let me try it with that. And as you can see, it works perfectly. You can even see the way it's just sitting on my mannequin at the moment. There's no gaping. Remember also when we did the dart manipulation, I just took off a little bit extra on that dart area where I just wanted to take off some of that fabric. So I'm really happy with that. Now all I'm going to do today, really, I'm going to just take you through how I'm going to finish the neckline to prevent that stretching out. And I also want to show you my technique, how I finish my armholes on all my sleeveless tops that I do. I always try and simplify things for myself when I'm sewing so that I don't have, you know, lots of, I don't even want to say complicated, but maybe I must say complicated. I really just want to simplify it for myself. That's how I sew. The easier I can make it for myself, the more I'm enjoying my sewing. And that's the tips that I'm trying to share with you now as well. Now all you're going to really do with this vest top, it's really was straightforward. You were just going to sew all your panels together. Remember, you had to mark them. So my panels are sewed together, and go and press them as well. Now usually when I work with my firmer fabrics, I don't worry too much about my fusible interfacing. I'll stabilize maybe just on this neck area over there, but because it's now really more stretchy, and you can see it's really stretched quite a bit, I wanted to stabilize a bit. Now I've gone and on my facing that we've cut, the facing that goes over there, I've gone and I've stabilized it. Now the stabilizer that I'm using, I also just want to show you, the stabilizer that I'm using is specifically for knit fabrics. So can you see I've still got that movement over there? And I just want to show you this. This comes in a white and a black, and I'm just going to open it up a bit. This is my piece I always work with. I just want to see which way is the stretch. All right, I'm going to go like this just to grab it. Can you see how much stretch I've got on this interfacing? Now I use it all the time. I use it on my knits when I need to stabilize my neck, I need to stabilize the hem area, but I still want that stretch. Look at that. Even though it's stabilized, it is working with my fabric. Even my soft weight fabrics, I really, even if it's a woven soft weight, I use that because it keeps that drape of the fabric. So I've gone ahead, I've just stabilized this area, and I've gone and I've stabilized my facing. Now also I mentioned to you, I'm not keen on having the facing inside. I find it bothers me. Sometimes it feels like it wants to fold out when I'm moving a lot. So I want to finish it almost so that it looks like a binding on the inside that I've sewn on, but purely because of the shape that we've got to get perfect. I can't just go and take a straight piece of fabric and get a perfect finish. So we needed the facing. And I'm going to sew the facing on, and I'm going to turn it to the inside, and I'm going to top stitch, and then I'm going to cut the excess away, and it almost just leaves like a band on the inside. Now another thing that you want to do, and I'm going to just put this on here for now, is where I've got my seams. I don't want bulkiness on my vest. So you've got to make sure that if your shoulder seam is pressed to the back, you are pressing the facing to the front. So that when I put those two seams on top of each other, I'm almost like butting them against each other, and I've got to fold it to the inside. I've split that seam allowance, so I don't have that really thick area over there. It's just, for me, it looks better because you can always see if there's too much fabric almost in that area. So first off, it looks better. So you have to make sure that you are going to go and do that to the front, your facing. And another thing that I did with my facing as well, just on this section where I put it on the fold, actually went and I took about 6 millimeters off, or 1/4 of an inch. Not a lot. I just wanted that little bit smaller than what this line is, so that I can stretch it a little bit in when I'm going to be sewing, and that is also going to prevent that gaping. It's just keeping it in a little bit for me. You'll see when I do the armhole as well, I sew in another piece of fabric into that area, just stretched slightly. We don't want to excessively stretch it, then you're going to get puckering. We don't want puckering on that seam. So mine was really 6 millimeters that I've gone. And you're going to put your pieces together, and I'm going to do a pin over there. I'm going to do my pin there. I'll do a pin on the shoulders, and I'll do on the back as well. And you're going to go and you are just going to sew around for me. Now we want a perfect corner. So I'm going to suggest that you're going to take your ruler and you're going to take your chalk. Let me get my chalk. Sorry, I'm just moving out of the picture there. And whatever your seam allowance is that you've added on, I've worked with 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm going to make sure that I make a little line just down, and I'm going to draw it here. I'll post a photo for you so you can see that cross. And wherever that seam allowance line will run, I've made a little cross. And if you look at the photo now, you'll see that little cross. And I know when I sew my needle, if it's in that position, I make sure my needle stays down. I can turn my corner and I can carry on. I'm getting a perfect corner, because that's what we want on this area, is that perfect corner. So you're going to now pin this for me. You're going to go ahead and you're going to sew whatever your seam allowance was, you're going to do. I also just wanted, and I'm sure some of you are looking at my facing and saying, she's got a very narrow facing. Mine is purposely like that because I'm going to cut it away. I'm really using the facing just to get the shape for the neckline. If you are going to leave the facing in and you're not going to be cutting away like what I'm doing, you have to make your facing slightly wider. And in that case, usually 5 centimeter to about a 7 centimeter facing. It's about 2.5, about 2 inches to about 2.5 inches. And remember, after you've drafted that facing, you've got to add your seam allowance as well. But that was really, mine is narrow because I'm going to cut it away. Purely, that's the only reason mine you'll see is narrower. I just went and added seam allowance on those areas. I didn't even add on the outside seam allowance because that's not the finish that I want. So please go ahead. You're going to pin this for me. You're going to sew it. Then after I've sewn mine, I'm just going to turn it to the inside. Oh yes, let me just take one step back. Once you've sewn it, on this little corner, you have to nip in. I think I'll just do that on camera for you so that you can see. You nip in and then you turn it in and then you press it. Remember, when we're sewing, we press every seam that we work with. And then once it's turned in, I'm going to go and top stitch around, and I do about a 6 millimeter or 1/4 inch from the edge. And then from there on, I just cut away the excess fabric. So go ahead, do that. I'm going to also just pin mine and sew it, and then I'll show you the nipping into the corner. I've gone ahead and I've actually sewn around. This one I actually drew on the doll, so it wasn't exactly, on my mannequin, it wasn't exactly accurate. But I've added 1 centimeter seam allowance, so I made sure that I sew my 1 centimeter. Now, all you need to do is into that corner of your stitching, you need to nip in. If you are scared that you're going to cut your thread because you don't want to cut the thread, you want to get as close as possible without cutting the thread. If you are scared you're going to cut through the thread, rather go and pin in that area. Just put a little pin so you know you are not going to go and cut through your stitches. All right, that's just if you want to. I usually manage to do it without that, and all I'm going to do, I'm just trying to get my hand in without being in the way. Let's see if we can do it this way. I'm going to go, and I can see I'm quite close there, and I just always give it a bit of a pull to make sure that I am close enough so I can go one more nip. There we go. All you're going to do that with all 4 corners, and then you're going to see that it is, when you fold it in, you are going to get a perfect finish on the inside. So I'm just going to do my front, and all I'm going to do, obviously you've got to still go press this before you're going to sew it, but look at that corner once I fold it in. Look at that. Can you see it's nice and smooth? It looks, no, it's not pulling there. I think that is just if I press it flat. But that is now the corner that we've got. And remember when we designed it, I told you, you've got to move from the corner when we designed it. We want the seam inwards a little bit. Now, if you are sewing it before, sorry, before you've actually attached the facing, it will almost look like this is in the wrong position, that it's going into the corner. But it's not. By the time I've done my seam allowance and I've sewn away, it moves to where I want it. Remember when we're designing without seam allowances, so I know my lines are accurately placed. When I add the seam allowance, then it doesn't look correct. But again, sewing that seam allowance away, that is exactly where I wanted it. I actually told you guys that I wanted it about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from that corner, and that is how it worked out for me. So I'm going to now go and I'm going to press my neckline, and I want you to also press it, because once it's pressed, I'm going to move all of this to the inside, and I'm going to go ahead, and you can go and do that as well. You're going to press it, and that is now if you're following my way, and I'm going to go and top stitch all around. But before I can top stitch it as well, once I've pressed it, I'm going to go to the inside and I'm going to trim a little bit of this fabric away. When I am top stitching, I don't want to be too far away. I want to top stitch about 6 millimeters from my edge, or my 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to trim this seam allowance that I have. I'm going to trim it so I have less than what I'm going to be sewing. All right. So I can go, I'm going to trim it away. So I've got about, I would say about 4 millimeters. I want it encased when I fold it over and I'm doing my top stitching. If you don't trim away, you'll go and top stitch, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a pin here so you can see. You will go top stitch, and once you cut away, you're going to see these pieces of fabric sticking out. We don't want that. So always go and trim away, and your trimming or your seam allowance left must be less than my seam allowance or my top stitching allowance that I'm going to give myself when I'm top stitching. Another thing, we are working on knits, so as you are top stitching, don't go and stretch too much. But you can see, even though it's giving, this is actually preventing it from stretching out my interfacing. And also when you top stitch, don't have too small of a stitch allowance, a stitch length. If you've got a small stitch length, it might stretch the fabric slightly on a knit. So on knits, when I sew, I always go a bit of a longer stitch length. Even if I'm going to sew seams, I always tend to do about a 3. I know some people go to a 2.5. I go to a 3 if I'm using my straight stitch. Again, I also just want to mention that you are finishing the inside however you want to finish it. I just overlocked. I didn't even go and sew these seams on my sewing machine. My overlocker, if I'm working with 2 needles, it's actually giving me a safety stitch, that left needle. So can you see, perfectly finished on the outside, and no sewing on my sewing machine. Because of my differential that I've used, I know I can control the fabric. If you're not too clued up on your overlocker, please go look at my overlocker basics as well, especially the differential, how you set your differential. If you don't have an overlocker, you can go and sew this on your sewing machine. Like I mentioned, go to a straight stitch, maybe a 3 stitch length, or you can go do that little zigzag. If you don't have that straight stitch, it looks like a little lightning bolt almost on your machine. If you've got an electronic or a computerized machine, you're just going to go to a normal zigzag stitch, and you're going to go anywhere between 1.5 to 2.5 stitch length, and anywhere between 0.5 to 1 on the width setting, because it's got to be a tiny, tiny little zigzag, so that when we open it, it still looks like a normal straight stitch that we've worked. So those will be your settings, but I've just gone ahead and overlocked it. Now I'm going to do the next step. I'm going to top stitch this so I can show you how I trim it away. And then I've just got a way that I finish with my armholes always. Again, that way, the way that I do it prevents any gaping on this area, especially on the front. It just seems to pull it snugly against my body without giving any puckers. I've gone ahead and I've gone and top stitched it around the neck, and like I mentioned, rather go to a longer stitch length when we are top stitching, and try to not pull your fabric when you are sewing around the neck. Now I work, if I'm going to clean up the inside, I work with a duck bill scissor. You can work with a normal scissor as well, but if you're working with your normal scissor, please be aware that you keep the scissor. I just want to show you, if you are going to work with a scissor like this, keep your scissor like this. Let the fabric lie over your finger. Keep your scissor like that, not like that. It's going to give you an easier stitch cut, and then I'm also not going to cut through my stitching that I have. I just find the duck bill is so much easier because as I'm sewing, my fabric lies over that flat area. Can you see there? And also I'm just going to try, I've actually trimmed it quite nicely. I've left a little piece there where I haven't trimmed all the way, but I can just go ahead. And I'm not going to cut the fabric underneath because this is actually preventing it from happening. But then my finish looks like this. It almost looks like I've got a little bit of a band on the inside over there. Please, I'm just mentioning this again. For me, when I'm working with a knit, a stretch fabric, and it's just a vest top, it's really casual wear for me, this. I'm going to do this quick finish. If you want a more formal or smarter outfit with this pattern, or you're working with a woven fabric specifically, you are going to keep your facing in. This for me is just, I'm almost copying ready to wear what I'm seeing out there in the shops, and that is basically the finish that they have. And then the other finish that I'm just going to show you now, if you look how nice and flat my armhole is, there's no waving, anything like that. And again, it's just overlocked and turned in. But when I overlock it, and again, I'm showing you these techniques because I'm finishing my knits on my overlocker. As soon as I work on my knits, I want my overlocker. So I've got differential feet that helps me control the fabric. Now, and again, this is also a technique for ready to wear, but I just take a little bit of my offcut fabric and I also sew it in while I'm overlocking the edge and pulling it a little bit so that it won't pull out. It's almost just keeping that fabric in for me. Now you're just going to go ahead and you're going to take just a strip of fabric that's left over, and we are going to take the underarm area and you're going to put this on the wrong side. I don't want it on the outside. I want it on this side, the wrong side, because once I've overlocked this together, these two strips, and this is the strip I'm going to pull a little bit as I'm overlocking. I'm again also going to trim away, and then that whole overlock stitch just gets folded under, and I can go and I can top stitch on that again. You can also, with these stitching that I'm doing, you are also welcome to use if you want to a double needle, but for me, doing it this way and cleaning it quite closely or neatly on the inside, I haven't really got space for a twin needle. And you've got to be also aware that if you work with a twin needle, you do want to stabilize a little bit, because on knits and a twin needle, we're going to get a little bit of tunneling on certain areas, especially if you're going to do the hem as well. So be aware that, again, you are going to stabilize nicely. I think if I'm looking at this, I'm going to be cover stitching mine at the hem. Here I would definitely maybe suggest that you go to a needle. I've already done my stabilizing on the inside of the hem, so that will help it to not or prevent it from tunneling. But if I'm working to a needle, I'm keeping that stretchability. It looks like a cover stitch. On the inside, it's only going to be a zigzag in the 2 rows, where with a cover stitch, I've still got my 2 rows of stitching showing, and it looks like an overlock stitch on the inside. So however you want to finish it, what you would usually do on your knits, please go finish it off like that. I just wanted to show you how I prevent gaping when I'm working with my armholes and my neckline. Now I'm going to take this piece of fabric, and I'm only pinning it. I always start at the underarm. I just want to show you. I'm going to start at the underarm area. It's over there. And I'm just going to pin a small section. I'm not working with a pin here because I need to stretch. So I'm just for placement when I start. I'll go and I just pin it in place. And you can pin it this way or that way. I'm going to pin it this way for now. Then I go to my scissor. Because I've got seam allowance there, I don't want to start overlocking on the edge. I know I've got to, for my seam allowance to work on my overlocker, I've got to cut off about so much of my fabric. Now, to get it in perfectly, I'm going to just nip it there. And again, I'm just going to move this together. I'm going to do a little cut out of the amount that I've got to cut away when I'm overlocking. And that is so that I can get this area nicely under the needles and my blade is not going to push the fabric. So if I'm doing that, so my hand might be in the way, but I'm giving myself that. So when I'm putting it on the overlock, and I'm going to show you now, This is the area that I slide under the needle. My blade sits there, and then as I start sewing, the blade just carries on cutting the amount that I need to cut. Because I want to place my fabric right under the needle, I'm going to have to throw these stitches off my stitch finger. Again, please go look at my overlocker basics. I cover all of these things in the overlocker basics, and that's why I'm not going in so much detail again when I'm doing this. You can see where I've actually cut it out, and I'm going to take this and I'm just placing it under the presser foot so that my needles are on the fabric, and I can see the blade is in that opening that I've put there as well. And I'm just going to just do it, and I'm just putting my needle down so it keeps my fabric in place for me, and I can go and now remove my pin. I don't want any pins here because I'm going to be pulling this little band that I have as I'm overlocking. Again, I don't want you to go and stretch it out when we're working. You're going to get puckers. This is really just a little, almost if I've got it like that, just that finger pushing it down. That is the only pulling that I need. But that is enough to prevent my armhole from gaping when I'm sewing on my knits, and specifically finishing this way. Again, there's so many other ways out there. I'm just showing you the easy way. You can go do, again, almost like fold it in half, go overlock it together, bring it in. You can go do that as well, but this is a soft knit. I'm trying to keep the thickness of fabric to a minimum on this area. So all I'm doing, I'm holding it down, and I'm going to start with my overlocking. I'm lifting my foot, making sure everything is lining up. And all I'm doing as I'm working, you can see I'm working the fabric on the bottom. This is lying on the top. I don't work from there. It's so, if this was under my presser foot and I've got to try and remove the fabric from under there, under that fabric, I can catch it. I can sew it in. I can cut my fabric accidentally. So I always work so that this is on the top and I can see that it's out of the way. And again, just make sure your seams where you've worked, that it stays flat where I'm going to be sewing over there. And again, it's literally that, putting it down, and I'm ready to go. Can you see that? I'm just doing that move again for you. I'm just getting my fabric ready here. I'm placing this, and if you need to lift the foot, take your fabric, move it. But I'm taking this, my finger presses it down onto that fabric, and it's enough for me, and I can go sew. I'm going to do it one more time for you. Place the bottom fabric so that it's right. Take this fabric, and as I'm holding it, this finger pushes it down. And that's the stretch that I need. Please don't go distort and pull. You are going to have puckers and you're not going to be able to even press it out. This is for me really just a little bit of support in this area, so that when I fold it over and I sew it, I'm not going to get any stretching on that fabric or gaping. I'm going to do it one more time, and then I'm going to go all the way around. One thing here as well, when I've started, I actually go and just trim that tail that I have. I trim it away so that when I finish, I just go over that area, and then we're going to trim the excess fabric away. So let me go ahead. I'm going to carry on sewing, and I'll show you after I've finished. When I get to the end, I'm going to cut my fabric strip just so that it's just going over the area where I've started, and I'm going to finish this area. Now when you get to this section, please carry on straight. Don't sew off so you get that little like a roof or that point forming under the arm. I'm going to carry on straight. Be aware that you are now watching for these stitches. I don't want to go cut them by accident, so I'm manipulating my fabric, lifting, moving it if I need to, and all I'm doing, I'm just going to go over onto that area that I've previously sewn. I'm going to then put my needle down. I'm moving my fabric out of the way, and I'm sewing off. And that way I am not going to get a funny point happening there where we are sewing off. All right. I'm just thinking now, this was actually not in the overlocker basics. I think I'll put it in the link below, or in the comments box below. But this was actually when I did a video on stabilizing my knits. That's what I did. Now, as we see our fabric like this, I now need to go trim next to my stitches. And once I've trimmed it away, all I'm going to do, I'm literally folding it over. I'm going to press it down, and I'm just going to go and I stitch it on the right side. So I'm just going to again show you working with the duckbill scissor. I can go and I cut it in close to my stitches. We don't want to cut our stitches. And all I'm doing as I'm putting it down, can you see? It's hanging over my finger. And look at this. This flat area prevents me from cutting my fabric at the bottom. So I'm just sliding it along. And all I'm doing, I'm cutting all the way. Can you see my area there that I've cut away? If I feel I can cut a little bit more, I can go closer, but I am very much aware that I'm not cutting my stitches away. And once you've done this and you've trimmed it all the way, you are going to fold this over. You don't have to go right on that overlocking stitch. I can just give it maybe a couple of millimeters of a lip. That's depending again on what seam allowance you've worked with. And you're going to fold it over, you're going to press it, and like we've done with the neckline, you're just going to go and stitch it down for me with a longer stitch length. Again, go to about a 3 if you've worked 3 over there, or 3.5. I think I did mine on about a 4. It was close to a 4 on my fabric that I've done it. And so I'm going to finish this off, and then we can have a look at our final top. Well, there you have it. The top is now done. I've shown you really quick, easy ways if you are working with a knit, how to finish the neck and the armholes. If I'm looking at it, I'm really happy because what I wanted was really a flat neckline. I didn't want it pulling away or even hanging a little bit. That's what we sometimes find if we do a neckline like this on a knit, that it's almost just, not just even gaping away, it's almost like it's wanting to hang open. So I don't have any of this with the finish that I've done. And if you look at the armhole finish as well, again, I'm not going to get any gaping on this area because of working with that extra piece of fabric and just pulling it a little bit. It's keeping my fabric in for me, but it's still moving with the garment. Also, I know some of you are now saying, but you've sewn with your straight stitch. Go and do a sample, and you will see the longer that stitch is that you sew, if you are doing a straight stitch, you still have that bit of movement of on the fabric. And if we look at this as well, can you see I still have, even though it's a straight stitch but it's a slightly longer stitch, I still have movement on my fabric, which is what I want. But I don't want excessive movement on these areas because I don't want any problems with that. Even on the armhole area, when I'm going to be wearing it, I've still got, can you see that movement? I think my hand's in the way. But look at that. Can you see that movement? And I just need that little bit. I really don't need a lot. Across on this area, obviously, I will always want more movement. We want more stretch on that area. But where we didn't want it, we eliminated most of that stretch. So I'm happy, guys. I'm actually looking, if I'm just looking at my top, I'm just trying to get it right on the doll as well. Can you see where this princess line is running? And that is when we're designing, we want it running over our apex. So my placement, when I've actually got it on my body, is perfectly on the apex area. So you can go and do it however tight you want it. I'm actually thinking, because I did a couple of other cheats here, and I'm thinking by myself, must I mention my cheats for you? Maybe I should. Cynthia, do you think I should? Cynthia knows me. When I'm sewing, I cheat as I'm fitting it on my body. Now, I'm working with more of a stretch fabric that I thought with initially when I designed it. And for me, I didn't want to go and size down and redo the whole thing. So what I did actually with mine, because of the amount of stretch that I have, I added 1 centimeter seam allowance all over, which is my 3/8. But I sewed 1.5 centimeters. That's the only thing. The only place that I didn't go and do it was just this corner, because there, if I do it, I wouldn't have had my placement correct. But I did start there at about 1, but because of over this area and the stretch that I've still got there, I eventually started moving to my 1.5. So I always try and, I don't know how to put it to you guys, but I make my life easier when I do this instead of overcomplicating it. And this way I knew that automatically I'm sizing down when I'm using more seam allowance up than what I allowed for. So that was just another thing that I wanted to mention. And please, I'm not saying you've got to go and do it. I've been sewing for so long so that I know on my body how I can cheat a little bit with my patterns. I don't want you to just go and do it and you're going to say, oh, but it didn't work for me. First, play with it and see. Another thing that I wanted to mention, guys, before I say goodbye to you is that next week, Tuesday, there won't be any Tuesday tips. I've got another booking for someone that's coming for one-on-one help with their patterns that they need to perfect. So I know she's here on Monday and Tuesday, so I know we're not going to have time for our Tuesday tips to record it for you. So we're taking a break next week, but the week after, we will definitely be back with more tips for you. So I want you now to go try this top, go try these neck techniques, armhole techniques, and give me some feedback in the comments. Tell me how, if it worked for you, how it worked for you. But mostly in my classes, I do show when I did classes on the knit fabric, that's what I showed them how to do, and everybody's always worked out. So that is all from me for this week. So enjoy the rest of the week and happy sewing.